And we are live. Hello, my friends. My name is Evelyn Joy, and welcome back to my channel. During this video, I'm going to be talking about grief and loss, both from the perspective of someone who has gone through deep grief and deep losses, and also from the perspective of what you can do, if you know someone who is going through grief and loss. So I'm going to give you some perspective on these. I wouldn't say this is an advice video. I'm just going to talk about grief and loss. Why is it important to talk about grief and loss? Our culture, unfortunately, doesn't make enough room for talk about loss and grief. So much so that you don't find out that most of the women you know have had a miscarriage until you have one and they find out and open up and tell you that they went through that too. Why is it that when I post smiling faces on Facebook, I feel like I did something good, but when I post about a loss, I feel like I'm asking for sympathy, and I feel like I shouldn't post that because people won't understand, or so I think. First, I made a list. I made a list of different kinds of losses that you can mourn, because you don't just mourn someone who died. You really don't. You can mourn the loss of health. A friend of mine at a young age got diagnosed with breast cancer. She had to have surgery and have her breasts removed, and she was in her early 30s, like 31, and not married yet. And that is something that you mourn. You mourn that lost opportunity to breastfeed future children. You mourn that loss of health. You mourn because of the fear that, what's the future look like? Will I do chemotherapy? An update on her, by the way, she chose not to do chemotherapy. She chose to do vitamin C infusions. And now, a year later, since being diagnosed, she's now cancer-free without doing chemo. So that's exciting. So loss of health. I remember my husband, he had extreme pain because of a car accident that caused problems with his back. He was in so much extreme pain that it caused depression. It really did, because when you're in extreme pain, it's just really hard. I have a friend who has lupus, and I don't know the kind of pain and suffering that she goes through every day. It's hard. You can mourn a loss of a job, especially if you are a parent and you have little ones looking up to you and expecting you to continue meeting their daily needs. Losing a job can be very scary. Why? Because that job pays to feed those little mouths, and that job pays to keep a roof over those little heads. And losing a job can be very scary. Loss of a business. In 2020, we have so many small business owners who are losing their businesses. We even have big businesses who are having to declare bankruptcy. And when you are the head of a company and you feel that responsibility of all of those employees that are under you, and all of them have mouths to feed and roofs to keep over their own, that causes depression over their own families, because you're an employer of hundreds if it's a bigger business, or an employer of dozens if it's a smaller business, but each one of those adults represents a household. And so to lose a business, it's not only hurtful for your own pocket, but it's also hurtful emotionally, knowing that you had the responsibility over other people's jobs, right? And so your loss of business causes loss of jobs to people in need during a hard economical time. the loss of a child. Now, in some ways, I can relate to people who have lost a child because I have had miscarriages and I had to give birth in the second trimester to a lost child. But I have a friend whose nephew just died at 9 months old, and I cannot relate because I could not imagine the pain of losing a child that you have raised, a loss of a parent. Sorry. I lost my mom to cancer, and my friend, her dad just died of cancer. But our relationships to our parents were different, and so I can't say I know exactly how you feel because I was in a different spot emotionally when I lost my mom than maybe where she was when she lost her dad. I had a sense of peace, but my own relatives didn't. And so we see the same loss can hit different people differently. And so we can't say to another person, "Oh, I've been through that. I know exactly how you feel," because you don't. You can't know how that person's feeling because their relationship was different. Their place in life is different. You can't know exactly how another person is feeling. Loss of a home. We're dealing with a lot of wildfires and hurricanes. There's tornadoes. There's job loss. There's a lot of ways you can lose a home. You can go from being secure, that you have a paid for, paid off roof over your family's head, to having nothing and escaping with your lives and just being thankful that you survived. And so a loss of a home not only takes away that confidence and stability of having a place to stay and rest your head and be safe from harsh weather conditions, but also the trauma of having experienced that lives on and sometimes causes nightmares and traumatic reactions to storms and all sorts of kinds of situations, right? So losing a home is another kind of loss, right? Divorce is another kind of loss. It's a loss of a marriage. It's a loss of hopes and dreams that you had for the future together. And it saddens me that it's taboo to talk about the pain of divorce. Now, I personally have not had a divorce with a spouse, but I lived through my mother's divorces, and children carry the burden of the emotions of their parents. And I watched my mom struggle through divorce after divorce after divorce. I carried her emotions and her depression. I felt it. And I felt, in addition to her pain, the hopelessness of being a child that has no control over a situation that's hurting your mom, and having that strong desire to fix it without the ability to do anything to help. And that's a helpless feeling. Loss of experiences in 2020. Many uh, many of our high school graduates lost the experience of walking across the stage to get their diploma, or going to prom, or all the fun things that they do at the end of high school or college. And so we mourn those loss of experiences that we had hoped for, and it doesn't turn out the way we expected. And then there's loss of friends. You can lose friends in two different ways. One way is that they pass away, and it's so tragic and hard when someone you love passes away, especially when they're of a young age. Um, it's hard to know what to say or how to be there for the family when you yourself are mourning. When you lose someone to suicide, there's an additional feeling of guilt. What could I have done better to encourage? Should I have reached out more? And so we feel that loss to a suicide. What could I have said? Could I have seen the signs? What could I have done differently that could have prevented my friend or family member from taking their own life? There's all kinds of different losses. There's more that I haven't even thought to add to my list. There's more just coming to mind right now, but whatever kind of loss you've experienced, I want to tell you as a Christian that with my 4 miscarriages and losing my grandpa and my mom and my grandma all in the last few years, I want to say that I reacted different ways. I want to tell you what helped and what did not help for me personally. I'm a creative person, and grief comes with overwhelming negative energy. There's so much negative energy, and you have to do something with it. So rather than self harm, which may be a temptation for some, um, I found that creating things, making things in honor of the individual that passed really helped me. When I had my first miscarriage, I just crocheted and crocheted and sewed until I made a big, huge baby blanket. And I sewed a diaper bag. And when I finished those 2 huge projects, I just poured all of my negative energy into it for like 2 weeks. And when I finished them, I felt a sigh of relief, like I accomplished it, right? And then I have something for future babies because my first miscarriage was before I had any healthy little ones. My second miscarriage was swept under the rug and somewhat robbed from me. I did not feel I could grieve because the doctors in the emergency rooms labeled it a late period, even though I had the pregnancy hormones um, present. Being just 5 weeks along of pregnancy, they thought it would be more comforting to me to tell me that it didn't count as a pregnancy if it's that early. But again, that's a loss of a life, but I felt robbed of the opportunity to name that baby and mourn that baby, right? So I swept those emotions under the rug and moved forward. So that was another way I dealt with grief. When my grandfather died, it was a different kind of grief. I got to be a part of his life as he deteriorated. In the final 2 months of his life, I helped to be one of his caregivers. In all honesty, my dad did most of the work. What I did was I brought sunshine into the house. My dad was staying with my grandpa and living with him and taking care of his daily needs. And I would sometimes do grocery shopping for them or vacuuming for them. And I always had my first baby with me, baby Esther. She was little, like maybe 9 months to 11 months during no, maybe 6 months to 9 months during the time that we were taking care of my grandpa. And baby Esther brought my grandfather, who was suffering from dementia, brought him back down to reality at times. He wasn't present with us mentally until he saw the baby, and then suddenly it was a outlet, a way of getting him back for a short time and having a rational conversation with him. So I did not feel so sad when he passed because I had my opportunity to say goodbye in his final months, right? I also felt that, he got to live a full life. So that was comforting. Also, I made things once again. I made food for the funeral reception. I made um I printed off I had this one photo where he had a genuine smile when he was laughing about being ornery about something, and I caught a smile. So I printed that picture off for everybody and framed it for people and gave it to them as gifts at the funeral. Then, when I lost my mom and I hadn't been talking, um, unfortunately, because of circumstances surrounding the way that she behaved around my family, and it was a safety concern. And she had no intention of being safe around my family. Unfortunately, I had to distance myself from her, and I know that hurt her deeply. But when I think of my children and their safety, I can't regret that. But when she was in the hospital, diagnosed with cancer, we came and we visited her. Well, we visited her before she was diagnosed. And she was in the hospital, and I said, "Great, this is the perfect opportunity. I can visit her with my kids. It's a safe situation. There's no way she's going to do anything dangerous. She's in a hospital bed, and there's cameras and everything, so we can visit her." Then she was diagnosed with cancer, and within 2 weeks, she deteriorated and she passed away. That was difficult, but I think it was more difficult for my brother because he was with her in her final moments and he had to make those decisions as far as whether or not to continue resuscitating and all of that. Um, and so I think my family members that were present with her in her final moments had the most negative impact and were the most distressed and the most hurt. I had lovely experiences because I got to visit her and decorate her hospital room and spend hours and hours with her and her grandkids, my kids, and, get pictures, talk to her. She sent me a text message um, telling me that she forgave me and she was sorry for. Oh, hey, Amy Lou. She sent me a text message saying she forgave me and she was sorry for anything she had ever done to cause a distance between us or whatever. And I said, I forgive you and I love you and I'm sorry too that it was that the way that it was. Um, and so she asked me to paint her nails. So when I came to the hospital that final time, I actually left my kids home with my mother-in-law because she was really deteriorating and I didn't want them to see her like that because she was getting really bad. Um, so I painted her fingernails and she was mostly not present mentally because of painkillers. She was in a lot of pain. And she asked me to paint her toenails as well. And I did. Um, and that made her smile. But that was difficult. But there was a sense of closure there. And then once again, I helped find the location for her funeral and plan it, and I led music with my husband at the funeral, and I made, you know, bulletins for the funeral, and I spoke some positive stories about her at the funeral, and I printed off copies and copies of photographs from her life from when she was a baby until the day she died. Not day, but like her final month. And I made a photo frame in the shape of a heart going from when she was a baby all the way until end of life. So I had like photos of her. It was like a photo collage and a heart all the way around like her life story basically. And I made those, and I also made like photo frames, like big ones, and I gave them to her sisters, her last ex-husband who was by her side in the hospital, both of my brothers, and just like her loved ones that were closest to her. I gave them photo collages, and I I created things. So I couldn't cry at the funeral because I had to speak and I had to sing. And also my closure kind of happened in the hospital. So it's interesting how each loss is different. When I lost Gabriel, um, that's I gave birth at 17 weeks gestation of pregnancy. I found out that I was having contractions and bleeding, and I went to the hospital and found out he didn't have a heartbeat. And the next day, I was in the hospital to be induced to give birth to him, but I actually went into natural labor and gave birth to him. And they were gonna do surgery to get the placenta out, but then I birthed the placenta, so I was okay. They were concerned about my health, but I was all right. But holding him, and then leaving the hospital without him and seeing other women with their babies. I was so thankful to have my children with me because I wasn't empty-handed. And for a while, for about a year, it was hard seeing pregnant women or seeing women with their babies. And it was weird. It was bizarre because I wasn't jealous. I was happy for them, but I was sad for me. Every time I saw a pregnant woman, or every time a friend said she was pregnant, I said a prayer that that baby would survive. Sorry. Every time I saw a woman with a baby, I was so happy her baby made it. But I was sad for me. And I really think God allowed me to have Joshua at the time, who decided to breastfeed until 2 years old to bring me comfort. um I didn't like breastfeed him because I wanted to bring comfort to me, but he was a mama's boy and he wanted to breastfeed that long, and it was comforting. And when God gave me Caleb, um I gave him the middle name Gabriel, and it brought a lot of healing to that wound. And then my grandma, before COVID, thankfully, we got to visit her several times. And she was just deteriorating in her health. She was not happy. She did not feel well. She could not get out of bed. She was just really, really deteriorating before our eyes, and it was really sad to see her suffering. And so when she passed, we celebrated that she wasn't suffering anymore. But obviously, it hit me differently than it hit her daughter, my Aunt Connie. My Aunt Connie was really close with her mom, so losing her dad and her mom was very hard for her. And so I could not go to my Aunt Connie and say, I know how you feel, Aunt Connie. My grandma died just like your mom died, or my mom died just like your mom died. No, because the relationship's different. The person experiencing the grief is different. The situation is different. And even with grief with a single person, you feel different in different situations. You may be fine one day and you're feeling guilty. How can I be fine when this happened? Or the next day you're sad and you question yourself, why am I sad today? I was fine yesterday. What's wrong with me? Grief, I always say grief is a mystery and it comes in waves, and you can't understand your own heart or your own reaction. But it's important to know, and I'm saying this because in our culture, we don't talk about grief. We sweep it under the rug. We keep it hush hush. We say, sorry for your loss and move on. We only go to the funeral. We don't ask them 6 months later if they're okay. And we forget to be there for people who are struggling. Okay, so now, was not planning on crying in this video, but we are talking about grief, right? I want to shift gears and talk about if you are the friend or loved one of someone who has suffered a loss and their loss doesn't necessarily touch you. Okay. For example, I have a friend who her dad just passed away of cancer. I only met her dad on one occasion. His death doesn't affect me, but I'm friends with her. So I want to know how I can be there for her, right? Another friend um lost a dear friend in her 30s, and it's just so painful to to go through. But I didn't know her friend. I know her, so I'm not feeling that. But I want to be there for her. I want to be supportive of her. And then I have another friend who her nephew at 9 months old passed away. I didn't know her nephew, but I know her. So what do I do in these situations? I let people know I'm here if you need a shoulder to cry on or if you need a friend. I even said to my friend, if you need a friend that's lost a parent, I'm here for you. I didn't say I know how you feel because I don't. I don't know how they feel. Even though I've lost 4 babies and 3 family members in the last few years, I don't know how they're feeling because I'm not them. And each grief is totally different. Each situation is totally different. So I can say, I'm here for you. What have people done for me that was comforting to me during my losses? When I lost the baby in the hospital, I didn't have visitors come. Except for just my children and my husband. I was in a hospital room by myself, and there was I think, uh, there was a lady that, sorry, just remembering back to that, sorry. Um, there was a bereavement counselor that came, and she had lost a baby before in the past. And the nurses, they brought a little box with mementos in it. And I was crocheting my own little blanket for him and my own little hat for him and stuff to keep in my box for later. I took, photos with him, and he was I just passed him on to be cremated in the hospital. Um we didn't like keep the ashes because he was too small to he was the size to fit in your hand. Um he was too small to like keep ashes from, and my mom was cremated and I didn't keep any ashes. My brother probably has that or something, but um I'm not one to hold on to the ashes of someone. I prefer to hold on to photos and mementos. Like that's just me, but like different people handle things differently. Um some people may want to visit a gravestone and leave flowers. My grandpa always did that with all of his loved ones that had died and stuff. But anyway, sorry. Again, that's my culture. I feel the need to apologize for crying on camera. I feel the need to hide whenever I am sad. Because why? In our culture, it is socially acceptable to smile in public and cry in private. And if you cry in public, at least for me, it feels shameful. It feels like why would you do that? Why would you cry in front of people? Um Maybe because of like the way that I was raised and the way I grew up, that I feel that crying is very private. So I think people always like call me a happy person because that's what you see. You see my happy side. But I'm a whole person. I'm not half a person, right? I do experience sad emotions. When I was a kid and my mom would be sad, I had the desire to make her happy. So I would go up to her and try to give her a hug, make her feel happy. And this was when I was 4.5 and my mom was going through a divorce with my dad. She pushed me away and said, "There's nothing you can do to make me feel better." And that was such a horrible feeling that I promised myself I wouldn't do that to my children. So my children have seen me sad. Unfortunately, I tried not to, but it's actually an opportunity to talk to them about sadness and say, "You know what? I am feeling sad." And Esther brought me her when we go to Dollar Tree, I promise this goes with the story. When we go to Dollar Tree, I try to get, like, practical things that we actually need, but I'll get them like, with cartoon characters on it so they feel like they got to pick out something special, but it's like, "We need Kleenexes, let's get the one with princesses on it." "Oh, which do you want? Minnie Mouse or princesses or Mickey Mouse?" "Oh, you want princesses? Okay." So it's kinda like their Kleenex box, but, like, it's everybody's Kleenex box, but they got to pick it out. So Esther brought me her princess Kleenexes when I was crying, and I said, "Aw, thank you." And actually, recently, Esther's been asking about what exactly is heaven, what exactly is death, and she wanted to know more about Gabriel. And I explained to her that Gabriel, he died when he was in my tummy. And when the doctors took him out, he was already gone. And she had a sad look on her face, and I said, "Is that sad to hear?" She said, "Yeah." And we talked about how we'll see him again in heaven someday and stuff, and but for her, I didn't show my children the baby that had passed. I didn't show them photos. Um, she's seen, like, a little photo that, like, you can't see very well in it. But sorry. So it one thing that makes loss even harder is when other people want to talk to you about the loss, but you're not ready to talk about it. So I remember after I lost Gabriel, my husband had to work on Sundays. So I brought my kids to church. It was hard enough bringing 3 little kids to church. My husband didn't get to be with me. That was hard enough in and of itself. And then I had just lost a baby. And then the sermon series that the pastor was going through was about, what do you call it? Was about Job and his losses. Okay. That was too hard for me. So what I did was I went to Sunday school. I dropped my kids off at their classes. I was in the service during the song time. And then when the sermon started, I snuck out. I drove in the van. I did this. I played hooky at church. I went to Burger King, got a hamburger, breakfast sandwich, whatever, and then came back to church, sat in the parking lot, ate a burger, had a breather, had a moment by myself. I did this like 4 or 5 different Sundays because I was having a hard time and I needed a break and I didn't want to hear a sermon about Job during my loss. So, anyway, I wanted to share with you guys a little bit about my losses, and just oh, a way that you can be there for someone who's lost someone is cook them a meal, give them a card with $100 in it. I'm not kidding. I received a card with $100 in it at my mom's funeral, and I felt like the person that gave it to me was the only person that actually cared. I know that's not true, but honestly, when you actually give like a little bit of money to someone or a gift card or some food, it felt like those people were the only people that actually cared. Because so many people say, "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss. Oh, here's a hug. Oh, I'm sorry for your loss. Here's a hug." Or here's some flowers. Sorry I couldn't make it to the funeral. Here's some flowers. Sorry I couldn't make it to the funeral. Here's some flowers. I'm sorry I couldn't make it to the funeral. Here's some flowers. Sorry I couldn't make it to the funeral. Here's some flowers. Sorry I couldn't make it to the funeral. Here's a whole table full of flowers from people who couldn't make it to the funeral. I hate flowers. I already hated flowers. They didn't have to do that. I'm not bringing these home to my house to be reminded of all the people that made an excuse to not go to the funeral. I'm sure other people find that comforting, that people send flowers when they can't make it to a funeral. I'm sure other people think, that was so nice of them to send flowers. Just different people have different perspectives. I hate flowers. Look at my flowers on my wall. Evelyn, you're a liar. I hate flowers in the form of an excuse. Oh, can I make it to the funeral? Here, let me send some flowers. For what? For what? For who? Who enjoys these flowers? No, not me. I don't enjoy excuse flowers. Sorry. Anyway, I'm actually going to be interviewing Marianne on my channel about OutSchool in 7 minutes. So I'm going to have to say goodbye. But I just have been thinking about loss lately because I'm finally to the point that I feel like this year in 2020, up until this video, I hadn't cried in 2020 until now. But it seems like this year I haven't had personal losses, but I know a lot of people who are experiencing loss. And I wanted to say too, a friend of mine who was widowed a year ago, and she's a homeschooling mom to 3 boys, and she's really, still in a lot of pain from the loss of her husband. That was totally unexpected. She just bought a kitten, and she took a picture with her kitten in the car, and she said, "Bringing a baby home." Get yourself a kitten. If you are going through a hard time, it reminded me so much when I was living in an apartment when I was single. A neighbor of mine committed suicide while I was out of state. I was in Utah for the summer, and I knew that I was one of her only friends. And she committed suicide, and she had me on the list of people that she wanted notified that she had passed away. And I felt so guilty from that, and it was hard living in that same apartment building where she had lived, and I lived alone. It was so lonely. There was such a spirit of sadness in the air. I got a kitten, and it really was nice to have someone to come home to, and it was a nice thing to have a kitten. So, get yourself a kitten. If you're experiencing loss, do an art project, pour all of your negative energy into something positive. And also, during my losses, sometimes I turned to God in my pain and He gave me comfort. And sometimes I turned away from Him in my pain and it was too painful to bear. And so I would say, as someone who's experienced different losses and both turned to God and away from Him, turn to God. It's not smart to turn away from your only shelter from the storm. The Bible says that God is close to the brokenhearted and He binds up their wounds. And so, definitely, if you're experiencing a loss and it's like, should I turn my back on God or should I turn to God for help? I would say, from experience, turning to God for help is much better choice. Anyway, all right, I'll talk to you later. Bye. Thank you.